now. Okay, welcome everybody. Obviously it's Mental Health Awareness Week, so Laura's very kindly organised for Matty to join us. Matty is part of the First Person project, and he's actually worked with McIntyre before. Last year's session was amazing, so we're really excited to have him here today. So Matty, if I hand over to you and you can get started.
Perfect. Hi guys, okay. So I don't know how many came and tuned in last year to the session, but I'll just kind of give a quick reintroduction of myself. I'm Matty. I'm a mental health nurse by profession. I've been in the mental health world for about 16, 17 years now. The majority of that was in the public sector, in the NHS, in various leadership positions around the country, typically working with quite hard to reach populations of people in prisons and secure environments and different things like that. But in 2018, following a bit of a professional epiphany, but also some personal circumstances, I decided to leave the NHS in a substantive manner and start First Person project, which is a non-profit social enterprise. And our thing, if we have a thing, our philosophy is we believe that if you strengthen communities, strengthen neighbourhoods, and bring them together and make them more cohesive, then that results in healthier neighbourhoods, essentially right across the board, mentally healthier, physically healthier, but also has a range of different social impacts as well around reducing crime and you know, kind of graffiti, antisocial behaviour, that type of thing, improving joblessness and things like that, and a lot of the determinants of health and well-being. So that's kind of what we do. Today what I'm going to do is just kind of touch on some of the kind of mental health fundamentals really that we touched on last year, revisit them, and there'll be some opportunity to engage, and then there's just at the end, we'll look at some skill building tools, really. Some of them you might have come across before. Like I mentioned, they're quite foundational. But our philosophy, and hopefully by the end of the presentation, you will kind of hopefully be thinking in the same way. Some of you may already be thinking in the same way, that it doesn't have to be rocket science. It really shouldn't be rocket science, kind of mental health help, really, at all. But I'll kind of, without further ado, I will just share my screen now, and hopefully it works. Has that worked? Yeah. Has it gone to full screen? Oh, that's good. Right, okay, brilliant. That's it. We're cooking on gas. So, the title of this presentation then is Fundamentally Healthy, Building the Foundations for Wellness. The fundamentally part is a play on words. It's essentially a mental health awareness presentation. We can, depending on engagement, we can get through it in about kind of an hour and a half with some skill build, about an hour and a half really with some skill building work at the end if people are okay with that. So just to open up things then. First of all, rather than giving people textbook definitions on what mental health is and mental ill health is, my personal philosophy on that is that's a bit of a redundant kind of limited approach, really. We try not to teach things in that way. If we think critically about mental health and well-being, and we really think about what it means and what we think it means, then you'll see that there's a lot of inconsistencies in what the textbooks say anyway. There's a lot of inconsistencies in what kind of the experts or the so-called experts will say. So rather than give textbook definitions, what we try and do is put the onus back on the learner, in this case yourselves, and the people that we work with, to really try and define what mental health means to them, try and really define what well-being means to them. And then in turn, with support and with more kind of education and advice, people are able to define what mental ill health means to them and what are the causes and the determinants of that. So one of the first things that we look at is, just to test this, is when we think of physical health, if we're having a conversation with our friends and colleagues around physical health, if we just think to ourselves for a minute, what types of things are we talking about when we're talking about physical health? You know, and typically the things that come out of a conversation around that are usually things like the gym, healthy eating, 5-a-day campaign, whatever diet is doing the rounds at that point. It could be if there's some sport on the TV or something related to physical health, but typically it's got a positive connotation. It's usually very health focused. Whereas when we talk about mental health, it's getting better, but when we talk about mental health, typically people talk about mental illness. So if the topic of mental health comes up, typically what you find people do is they start relating to their experiences of mental ill health or poor mental health. They start talking about maybe depression, anxiety, stress, basically the opposite of what we're actually talking about, which is mental health. Health is obviously the opposite to ill health. It's the other end of the spectrum. It's a proactive thing. It's actually a preventative thing. It can be, in the same way that the gym and eating healthily and stuff like that can be preventative to certain physical illnesses. But when we talk about mental health, we should talk in those terms about it. And on that point, we can start to really realise that everybody has mental health. Only some people will develop what we describe and what we maybe recognise as mental illnesses, and we're all vulnerable to it. We can all be in that position. So again, when we talk about anything to do with this topic, it's essential that we define things for ourselves. We really sit there and we ponder and we reflect upon what mental health means to us. So it's, rather than saying, you know, where I've titled this, you know, what do you think good mental health means? Well, it's literally aimed at you, the individual. This is not something for the group, really. I'm talking directly to you personally. So, you know, what do you think good mental health means? Define it yourself. Try and understand it yourself. Try and conceptualize it and make sense of it yourself. And then also, you will have a kind of a barometer, if you like. You will have a bit of a blueprint, really, to try and understand where you're at. You will have something to measure it against, which comes on to the next thing around self-reflection. So when you then begin to talk and think about mental health, you will know exactly what it means to you. Although that might not apply to others, it applies to you, and it's your mental health that we're talking about. So when you self-reflect on it, you can learn and you can grow, which is obviously the point of reflection. And equally, like I say, as the presentation progresses, you'll realise that these same skills can be applied to what we call, you know, poor mental health or mental ill health or mental illness, or there's a range of different interchangeable terms for it. Is that okay with everyone so far? Yeah. Right. Okay. So, okay then. So, what does good mental health look like? Well, again, I'm reluctant to give textbook definitions, because if we're being personalised and individualised, then good mental health looks like something different to everybody. But just briefly, really, it's about healthy thinking, which is, healthy is one of these terms, isn't it? So what does health mean? Well, again, if we're defining it ourselves, and bear in mind I'm talking to you as the individual, then healthy thinking will look like something to each and every one of you. So even though they seem like quite general terms, if you apply them to yourselves individually and personally, then they'll start to make more sense. Sometimes you'll hear this described as cognition, you know, good cognition, healthy cognition, but in simple terms, healthy thinking. And then the perception of that. So, you know, what sense are we making of these thoughts? What sense are we making of the emotions and the feelings that we're experiencing? It can look like how we live, how we work productively in a fulfilled way, whatever that means to us, in a way which is meaningful. Again, however that means to yourself. To be able to. Sometimes we talk a lot these days about resilience. Resilience is something that pops up quite a lot. And whilst I understand that term, I think essentially it's trying to understand what resilience means to us and trying to sum that up. You know, Cuprinol, the shed paint, is described as resilient, isn't it? You know, it's like it stays on. There's, there's lots of different kind of products that are described as resilient, which have got nothing to do with humans and the complexity of human life. So I'm not sure how useful the word resilient is all the time. However, if we translate that and we say, well, resilience means kind of our ability to manage and cope with the stresses of everyday life, or to cope and manage in times of change and uncertainty. And we use that as the measuring stick, then that makes a lot more sense to me than saying somebody is or isn't resilient. I'm not sure about the word, but again, it's a personal thing. I ask you then to think really about what makes up mental well-being for yourselves. You can put it in the chat if you want. If anybody wants to chip in, they can. But ultimately, it'll be a personal thing. Anybody will contribute? No? I'm trying to see if the chat. Oh, sorry. Trying to get. Is anybody monitoring the chat? Sorry.
I can monitor the chat. There
Thank you.
In there just yet.
Right, that's okay. That's okay. What I'd say to people is, you know, it might be that sometimes in a group setting, it's not always the most comfortable, and you know, you might not know everybody, and even if you do, it still might not be the most comfortable. That's fine as well. If talking out loud or sharing things out loud is not something that people are comfortable with just yet, that's fine. But maybe just either take a mental note or a physical note of some of the points, and then just ponder them, just think about them. They seem like pretty broad, maybe even simplistic statements, but like I said at the top, it doesn't have to be complicated. I think the more complicated it gets, you know, clearly the more difficult it is, and the more hard it is to understand and actually do anything about. So, you know, what makes up mental well-being for you?
Rachel's just popped in the chat, knowing when I need a holiday to take a break.
Ah, perfect.
Catherine has put getting enough rest and sleep.
Okay. Perfect. Okay.
I would add, for me, you know, I think socializing with my friends, my peers, certainly makes a huge difference to my mental well-being.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And I think it's important at this point really to kind of be clear about mental health and what mental well-being is. I think mental health it's one of these things, much like physical health. We all have it. It's all there. You know, it doesn't mean that we always feel on top of the world, and it doesn't mean that, you know, even if we might even have a diagnosis, sometimes people think that a diagnosis or a bad experience like that, or a label, can stop you from having good mental well-being, can stop you from feeling positive some days. Sometimes people even feel guilty about that. How many people feel guilty when they just don't do anything? That's becoming more. I do.
Definitely.
You know, yeah, you know, and you start wondering why am I not doing stuff? Just reading. Okay, perfect. Thank you for contributing, guys. So again, just some kind of general points. You know, good mental health essentially is influenced by a wide range of complex and intertwined factors. Ultimately, you know, humans are complex by makeup. You know, I think all creatures are, but humans particularly difficult. I know because I am one, you know, as are you guys. But when you add in some of these really difficult things that can happen to us, or maybe they aren't difficult when you're experiencing them, but much later they become difficult. Maybe you aren't even aware that they're happening, but they influence you in a way that you, like I say, you lack awareness in. Things that you might have learned at home, or in the place where you're from, or the circles that you mix in, the way you were brought up. Some of the experiences, both good and bad, difficult life events, but even positive life events can have a lasting impact. Again, this perceived ability to cope, or in some cases, their perceived inability to cope. Your spiritual, social, political outlook can have an impact on things. There's a genetic susceptibility as well. It's a small but significant link for some people. Our philosophy, really, a first-person project, like I mentioned before, is I think that connection and that social, the social influences that make up our mental health and well-being are, for us at least, more influential than than a lot of these other things. But that's just the philosophy. Again, like I mentioned, there's no kind of definite clear cut, this is right, this is wrong. That is as a result of me doing these types of mental exercises, thinking around topics and trying to be quite philosophical about it. You know, for me, that social connection matters a lot more than other things for me and for the organisation that I'm, you know, leading. But it'll take many shapes and many forms for different people. But just continuing this, then there's different, like I say, some of these kind of psychosocial factors. Employment, access to employment, quality employment, all of the things that are associated with being, you know, good employment, being valued at work, being treated well, enjoying your job, mixing well with the people at work, being, you know, remunerated and rewarded for the work that you do, doing meaningful work, all of these things. But then the steps even before that, thinking about work, thinking about kind of college and education, and even feeling as though you, certainly with some of the people that we work with, feeling as though you are able to even think about a job. Some people don't feel that they're worthy of a job. I don't always think that's represented very well in the media, is it really? You know, they're just called, what types of things do you think people like that are typically called in the media? No, it's okay. They usually call things like scoundrels and things like that, aren't they, in the mainstream media? It's usually picked on. So the other thing I'll do, by the way, guys, is I'll try and make some good book references and different things like that. There's a really good book, God, I won't forget her name now, but it is called Stigma. It's actually a really popular book. It's something I've read recently. I think I've actually got it in my bag. The first chapter is dedicated to kind of the story of employment to unemployment and the impact that can have in about a 6-month period, from somebody who had a job and everything was going, you know, we use the term loosely, but okay for that person. They felt like everything was fine, and then within about 6 months it weren't fine, and their whole picture, their whole the whole kind of mental health and well-being completely deteriorated, done a complete 180-degree turn, and, you know, they began doing things that we don't associate with, maybe sometimes we don't associate with everybody, but things like self-harming and not wanting to be and acting quite chaotically and things like that, all within 6 months, all because of this identity that they had with their employment, and that was taken away from them for quite normal reasons. It was actually a flexible working kind of disagreement around the child. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but, you know, employment, financial security, adequate housing, access to healthcare. On the access to healthcare, pardon me, has anybody tried to get a GP appointment lately? Right, yeah. No?
Nightmare. We can't get one. Can't even speak to the receptionist.
Right, okay, yeah. It's very true. No. It's hard. So if we think, right, let's just kind of just play with this, you know. If you think about how you access the mainstream services that are available, the services that we pay our tax for, and this is not a political rant, this is just me doing a kind of a mental kind of exercise where you just think about it. How do we get the diagnosis that is essential to access certain services? We usually start with the GP. But if you can't get in with the GP, you can't even get a chat, never mind a diagnosis, which might take a number of appointments. And how do you get that referral to the local mental health service? Yes, there's self-referral routes and things like that, but how many people know about that? And where would you typically find out about that? It's usually through your GP, or at least you'd imagine it would be. So access to healthcare is massively important, because when we think about mental health and well-being, even though self-definition is really important, as I've mentioned, there's a lot of things that go on around the individual and around families that are seemingly out of their control. You know, how does an individual improve their access to healthcare if they're already trying? Is the onus on the individual, or should the onus be on the service? What do we think? Right, fair enough. I think it should be, it's probably a bit of both, but more on the service. And that's that bottom point there. Other social and economic factors that can have an impact. Politics, essentially, cutbacks, and all of the things that have made our health service the way they are. Having access to these essential services is so important for your mental health and well-being, for everybody's mental health and well-being. And as we see more and more of that being stripped away or restricted in some way, then the onus is on us as services to be thinking about how we can improve that. Or if this is a workplace thing, how we as employers can improve that. How can we make sure that if somebody's got the confidence and the confidence and they've built up the confidence enough to ask for help, how can we make sure that that door is open to them and it's no door's the wrong door? How can we do that? I think that's on all of us. But these are just a few things. You guys might have other things to add. If you do, please put them in the chat, please. Okay. Thanks to Jennifer. Service. Right. Okay. So rather than trying to talk about mental illness in the sense of a diagnosis and trying to stick people in boxes and put labels on people, I think for a long time now, there's been a whole body of research and a lot of academic people in practice talking about the limits to diagnosis and how diagnosis can be useful to some people, but to a lot of people not so useful. And we spend all this time and resource trying to put labels on people in order to file them into the appropriate service. But like I say, there's a lot of research out there that kind of questions the usefulness of doing that. Because there's a number of us in the room today or on the call today, and statistically, there'll be a number of us that have experienced poor mental health, and within that there'll be a number of us that have had a label assigned to us, or we may well feel value in getting this label. But I'd then argue, well, let's say 2 or 3 of us have had a diagnosis of depression and anxiety. Are the 2 or 3 of us exactly the same? Does our depression and anxiety present the same for each of us? Did the factors that resulted in the depression, anxiety, stress, are they the same? And will our prognosis, will the end result be the same? Will our recovery be the same? I'd argue that the answer is no. So rather than viewing things in diagnostic terms, let's get a label, let's label the illness, let's say this person is this or this person is that, and put them in a box. There's another way of looking at it, and they call it the mental health continuum. Again, it's quite a fundamental, simplistic really way of looking at it, but I think it makes a lot of sense. And it's essentially based around this idea of a line of experience or a continuum of experience. And rather than having labels, we have at one end of the spectrum positive mental health, good mental health, however that's defined for you. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have mental ill health. And everybody is able to have good experiences with the mental health, and everybody is able to have poor mental health. You can move up and down the continuum to varying degrees, depending on a range of kind of different interrelated circumstances. Some of the things we just mentioned, for example, before, the things that influence your mental health for the better or for the worse. And if you view it in those terms, and then we think about if that type of theory was to take off across mainstream services, across society as a whole, across mainstream media, what would that do for the stigma attached to mental health and mental illness? Would it improve it, or would it make it worse? If we all felt the same, if we all knew that we were all vulnerable and we were all able and we all had the potential to achieve positive mental health, my bet is that it would be better. It would improve the stigmatization of mental health, which is something that we're always trying to do, aren't we? Equally, it would make things like, so the theme for Mental Health Awareness Week this week is loneliness. I don't know if you've seen that. And who can remember the time when loneliness wasn't deemed to be something mental health services needed to do anything about? Where was it dealt with? How was loneliness addressed at a community level? There's things like youth clubs and just relationships and a cup of tea over the garden fence and all this type of stuff. Quite simplistic things. Don't claim to reinvent the wheel, but people popped in. Yeah, thanks, Anita. People did. people popped in, and the skills that we have inherently as humans and people in communities that care about each other, these are the skills that all of you top therapists, psychiatrists, mental health professionals have too. And it's for those reasons that their interventions work, not necessarily the type of therapy they're using. I don't think it is. You can have the best therapy in the world, but if the connection's not there, and the relationship's not there, and the empathy and the care and the compassion's not there, then it doesn't matter what framework you're using, whether it's CBT or CAT therapy or DBT or whatever it might be, the connection has to be there. I think that making sense to people. Yeah. Okay then, so another one of these questions for people to ponder then. So why do we even need good mental health? Why is it such an issue? If anybody wants to put in the chat oh, sorry, I'm just there. Thanks, Catherine, for comments on the last post there. Thanks, Laura. You had to be happy and to function, to get by. Yeah. Could we live in a world where it wasn't a mentally healthy world? Could we do the things that we need to do? Okay. It can affect all areas of life, definitely. Thank you. We need to be able to cope day to day. Yes, we do. Yeah, to help us cope. Perfect. Yeah, definitely. So there's lots of reasons really. Again, some of these will resonate, some of them won't. Some of them you might want to add to, but essentially, it's things like to get and to maintain a good sleep pattern, which is fundamental for life, really. To develop and maintain good relationships, to do well at school or whatever it might be. Oh, sorry, guys. To deal with loss and change. To manage difficult emotions, to regulate our emotions. Sometimes they don't have to be difficult emotions. They can be really positive emotions, or at least things like happiness, laughter, a time and a place to, we've all met a person who seems to be happy all the time and happy in every situation. And for me, I love people like that. The more of them, the better. But for some people, that might be difficult for them to manage because you might think, well, we can't be happy all the time. So that's about a kind of an emotional intelligence thing. So sometimes good mental health can impact our ability to be intelligent about our emotions and the impact that our emotions have on others, but equally the impact that other people's emotions have upon ourselves as well, and to manage negative feelings. Okay, so like I say, to help others, brilliant. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Catherine. So, like I've mentioned, so we've looked at mental health and well-being, and what that looks like, and the potential for that, especially if we self-define and self-reflect about that for ourselves individually. But what are mental health problems then? What's mental ill health? Well, it's something that doesn't discriminate. It's, if we think about the continuum again, anybody can be vulnerable to developing what looks like what we typically describe as a mental illness or one of the mental illnesses. Depending on your circumstances, depending on your ability to cope, your perceived ability to cope, your life circumstances, you can develop mental health problems. We all can. Some of us might have already developed them. Some might have developed them and not acknowledged them as mental health problems, which can cause further problems down the line. We see there's a huge emphasis these days on men's mental health, because of that thing I've just said before, where there's a lot of mental health problems that are just living beneath the surface, but they aren't acknowledged by the individual or the society around them. So they only become a huge issue when usually it's gone too far. And sadly, in a lot of cases, it goes, to that final point really of suicide and people taking their own lives, sadly. But mental ill health is something that doesn't discriminate. It essentially impacts, it's a wide range of experiences. It can affect how we think, how we feel, how we behave. We can develop patterns where things repeat themselves and becomes kind of like a self-fulfilling thing, really, where, Oh, is everyone okay? Yeah. Can I check if anyone can hear me? Yeah, thanks, Laura. Thank you. Cheers. I'll carry on. Okay, so it can affect our thoughts, feelings, behaviours. We can get ourselves into this self-fulfilling kind of cycle, really, where, you know, this happened, then this is what was going on, this is what I thought about it. It doesn't work this slow, really. It usually works a lot faster than that. But basically, sometimes something can happen, and we can interpret it one way based upon our thoughts and feelings. We can then act upon that, and then depending on the outcome, we'll either usually encourage us to do it again, or maybe put these kind of handcuffs on us and make us think that we can't act any other way. Because, like I say, it's happened so quick, and we don't have that time to really truly understand what's going on. Like I mentioned there, it can happen as a result of experiences which are quite easily identifiable, or sometimes there's no identifiable cause. Sometimes it's a range of things that are causing it, and it can occur mildly, moderately, or severely, really. And like I mentioned when we looked at the continuum, somebody can have a diagnosis, somebody can have a mental health problem, they can have the label, but they can also have a good day. You know, it doesn't mean that their problems are any less severe necessarily, or that they shouldn't be taken seriously or treated with care. But vice versa. You know, you don't have to have the label, you don't have to be put in the box. And you can, you know, you can have a bad day, and that doesn't mean that should be taken any less seriously than anybody else. And that's why this continuum theory is a much better way of looking at it, I feel, because we're not waiting around for professionals to stick labels on us, labels that aren't particularly useful all the time. Does that make sense for people? Yeah? Okay. So mental health problems, when you break them down, if we're talking about symptoms, you can take any of the mental health problems, mental illnesses, and you can break down the various symptoms or the various kind of ingredients of them, and all of them can be experienced on a common basis, right across the population, even the most extreme ones. You know, things like voice hearing or hearing things generally. You know, if somebody came up to you today and said that they were hearing voices, depending on your experience and your confidence, you might think that person needed help immediately. But hearing things is actually quite a common human experience. There's a lot of research on it. The whole Hearing Voices network, which is right across the world, to be fair, but there's things across England. There's a really famous book by two professors, Marius Rom and Sandra Escher from the Netherlands, which talks about hearing voices as just being it's a complete part of everyday life. We just don't realise we're hearing things, we're experiencing a hallucination, as they call it. So, you know, if anybody's ever heard somebody call a name and they turn around and there's nobody there, then you've experienced the auditory hallucination. If you've ever been dropping off to sleep at night and you've thought you've heard something, you've woke up, you've experienced the auditory hallucination. The opposite, if you've ever woke up in the morning thinking that you've heard something, you've experienced the auditory hallucination. It doesn't mean that you're unwell, it doesn't mean you've got schizophrenia or anything like that. It just means that you are human, and, you know, where it becomes more serious is when these symptoms or these ingredients come together in a particular way and to a particular degree of severity, and then this grip that we have on our kind of experience, this perception of reality that we have, starts to be blurred. And then you know, some people can't keep themselves safe, some people can't ensure the safety of others because of some of the things that they're thinking, which is quite distorted at times. And they're the people who are really severely impacted, and I'm sure we've come across them all at some point in our careers or in our lives. But the thing to not forget is that experiencing a mental health problem, any mental health problem, it's upsetting. It can be confusing, it can be frightening. For some people, dare I say it like myself, it can become a real asset, it can become a real strength. You know, when I experienced psychosis, I'd seen and heard things, and I actually had a cup of tea with my mum Right? It doesn't sound that difficult, but the problem was my mum had been dead for 6 months. See, that's where it gets a bit like, okay, but it wasn't scary. She never made the tea, by the way, but that's not unusual for my mum. It was, yeah, we sat, it was 3 o'clock in the morning, we had a cup of tea. You know, next morning, when obviously, the other half and stuff had seen it and everything else, I weren't in the slightest bit distressed by it. I couldn't remember a lot of it, really. As time's passed, I can remember stuff. But the last thing it did was upset me, confuse me, frighten me, any of this type of stuff. But I did notice that the cup that I'd filled up for my mum hadn't been drank out of. So, that reminded me that she wasn't actually there. But, so it can be upsetting, confusing, frightening, but actually, for some people in the future, it can actually help them and can become an asset. But our job for ourselves, our job for our colleagues and people around us and the people that we work with, is to challenge this kind of negative, unrealistic expectation of mental health. I'm sure we've all seen on like Instagram and stuff, good vibes only, positive vibes and all that type of stuff. That's lovely on the face of it, but when you think about it, is that realistic? Can we always be around good vibes? Is everything always positive? Not really. Balance is what we're trying to achieve. Because if we don't achieve that, people might be put off from actually talking about problems. They might have a negative expectation, a negative kind of expectation of what can be done for them, or in fact, they might invalidate what they're experiencing and not talk out about it, and that can become a real problem. Okay, are we keeping up? We're doing okay. Cool. Thank you. Okay. We don't need to do this one. Okay, so just quickly then, there's only 3 questions. How many people experience some form of mental health problem in England per year, do we think? If anyone wants to shout out, by all means. If anyone wants to put it in the chat, by all means. That's fine if you don't as well. Okay. C, A, B. Okay. B. Okay. Mixed C, B. Okay. Perfect. Right. So, what the data tells us, what the research tells us, and certainly what all of the big organisations tell us, is that it's 1 in 4. Now, I personally think that, I think depending on how you look at the definition of mental health problem, I think it can be more, less, about right. I think 1 in 4 is high, isn't it? It's a lot of people. It's literally millions and millions of people. But a lot of it depends on how you define what mental health problem is. And if up until this point, you've been thinking in a kind of strictly diagnostic, a mental health problem is schizophrenia, for example, right? That's how people think. It's not feeling stressed or feeling anxious. That's not a mental health problem. Schizophrenia, bipolar affective disorder, PTSD, personality disorder, they're mental health problems. If you think like that, then you're not going to think 1 in 4 is right. Conversely, you might think that everything's a mental health problem. And it might be, 1 and 2, because obviously it's going to raise it higher. I think the stat will make more sense to you once you start thinking about your perception of what mental health problem is. These stats are based upon diagnosis and people visiting the GP and getting some sort of label to direct treatment. But as we've just mentioned before, what if these stats were taken from the year before last? So what if in the year before last you couldn't access your GP to get that label? Can you still, you might have experienced an adult problem, but you might not be included in them numbers. Okay. So what's the old saying? There's lies, damn lies, and then statistics, isn't it? But 1 in 4 is kind of what's put around. And even if it is 1 in 4, it's still high, isn't it? Okay. What percentage of people with mental health problems receive no treatment at all? Right. B, C, B, 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 B. B seems to be the popular one. Is anybody surprised that it's C? That's high, isn't it? Now, that's high, however you want to look at it. Let me just see what the chat's saying. Okay, B, C. That's high regardless, however you want to look at it. But again, what's treatment? Typically, if we're talking about the treatment that is given out to people, particularly in the UK. Well, to be fair, in a lot of the Western world, really, a lot of the treatment is centered around medications and talking therapies and psychology. So accessing, particularly talking therapies and psychology, isn't always straightforward. Sometimes there's waiting lists, and sometimes you have to go and do different things before you access it. Accessing medication is a lot easier, but I'm reliably informed by people in the university that that's getting better. They're doing some research and they reckon that's getting better, which is good. But actually, what if we're working with a lady now and she doesn't define treatment as either medication or therapy? She doesn't believe that's treatment at all. So she technically, statistically, would fall into this group, but she's doing okay. We're a mental health service, but we're not working with her because she's mentally ill as such. We're trying to keep her healthy. We're trying to learn from and trying to understand what it is she's doing. She's really into spirituality, for example. So treatment for her would be her spirituality. So she would fall into this 75%, but she's actually fine, and she has a diagnosis of bipolar. See? So sometimes the stats tell us one thing, but it's important that we look beyond them and try and understand exactly what it's saying. And the reason I put this up, particularly today, is because Mental Health Awareness Week, you see an abundance of stats. You've got to really think about what they're saying and try and interpret them in the way that makes sense to you. This is a suicide one now. Now, I do apologise for people if this is sensitive, and I'm only putting this in because I don't want people to lose sight of the potential impact of not being able to help or not understanding how to help. Okay, so if people just want to put in the box what they think it is, how many suicides were recorded in the UK in 2018, please? Okay. C, B, okay. Yeah. Okay, A, B. It was A. It was 6,506 in 2018. Now that's high. That's high regard. One is high. All suicides are preventable, and all suicides are a tragedy, without doubt. Without doubt. I'm not going to get, certainly not here, I won't get into kind of free will and choice and all of these debates. There's certainly a debate to be had there, don't get me wrong, I don't want to be disrespectful to people, but it's a big topic to get into that. But my personal opinion is they're all preventable, and each one is a tragedy. But the thing to be mindful of here, and I don't want to send you away feeling worse, but I just, again, to try and understand statistics. How many suicides? Now, suicide is a verdict. That's a verdict that the coroner gives. So if the coroner doesn't say that something is suicide, then it doesn't go down. It's not recorded as suicide. It goes down as something else. Usually something like death by misadventure or something like that. You might have seen that in the paper, or unknown circumstances or things like that. Those don't get included in the suicide figures. So whilst we're sat here, no doubt, saying 6,500 is huge, the true figure is probably a lot higher than that. You just haven't had that suicide label attached to them. If people are interested in the latest thinking around suicide, there is each year the National Confidential Inquiry into Suicide is published by the University of Manchester. It's free. You can Google it. It's got lots of research in it, lots of statistics. Some of it's useful if you like statistics. Some of it is useful because it talks about the trends that have been seen and the different kind of features of each of the suicides that have been seen, and it allows us to learn and maybe address some of our practice and some of our services that we work in. Okay. So again, I'm only going to just briefly touch on this really, but there's lots of different types of mental health problems. I'm sure you've heard of a lot of these. For people who have heard of them and maybe even worked with some of them, just reflect really on how many people could how many people fit neatly into one of those boxes. and how many people could potentially fit into many of those boxes. If we talk about how schizophrenia, for example, is thought of in the UK, and then if we compare it to how schizophrenia is thought of even in the US, it's quite different. It's not exactly the same, even though the diagnosis itself comes from the same book, something called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. That's what's used to diagnose people. There's countries in the world that have completely done away with the label. I think Japan was probably one of the most famous, not about 10, 15 years ago, not completely done away with the label of schizophrenia. There's been lots written still to this day. If you're interested in, and you use YouTube and stuff, there's a Drop the Disorder, which is a group of really lots of psychologists, some psychiatrists as well, who kind of oppose labels and just question the point of them all the time, or the overuse of them maybe is probably the best way. But and then there's some things on there that can be difficult to work with for some people. Some people might not even class them as mental health problems. Does anybody ever work with somebody with a personality disorder? Yeah, all right. And don't get me wrong, look, personality disorder, for quite some time in the NHS, my clinical speciality was personality disorder. I absolutely love that working with that group. But yeah, you know, slowly we're getting a bit better, but if at least certainly for the last 10, 15 years, something like personality disorder or eating disorders weren't classed in the same way as your schizophrenia, your depression, your bipolar were. No way. And that came across in people's values and the interactions that they had with people and the tolerance that they had for certain behaviours and certain expressions. It's getting better, I think, I hope. Certainly the people I work with seems to be getting better, but you know, the thinking's still catching up. You know. But like I mentioned there, the symptoms and mental health problems may overlap. You may fit into one box, but you may, depending on how it's looked at, may fit into other boxes. That's why the diagnostic approach is not always the best way. Everyone's experience is different and can change. And you might get one or many diagnoses. Some might not get any diagnosis, but that doesn't mean that things aren't difficult and that they're not experiencing difficulties and problems. Okay, then, so I want you then just to think really about how in the past or even the present, how you've supported others with their mental health. Just you don't have to, you can contribute in the chat if you want to, if you feel comfortable to, but have a think about it. How have you done it, and how was that informed? So how did your perception and your philosophy of mental health and mental ill health influence how you've supported other people? The reason I ask that is sometimes we think we haven't done the best job because we haven't sat there and done a course of therapy with somebody. We've just held a hand or helped them to make a cup of tea. But we go away from that thinking, I haven't done anything, when in fact you've probably done a lot more than you realise. And that's been influenced by your perception. Conversely, sometimes people will do above and beyond, or so they think for somebody, but it doesn't have the impact. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. I just needed to listen. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Listen to them. Listening is so underrated. I tell the story when I was going through kind of my difficulties. I accessed mainstream services. I took medication. I'm not against medication. There's a time and a place for it, really, for some people. But I took it. But I also accessed a bereavement counselling, and the guy who was my counsellor. Okay. Sorry, guys, I'm just reading the chat. I don't want to miss out on stuff. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, perfect. So just saying about the counsellor James, we've done 10 sessions and it was bereavement counselling. Now, if you've never received bereavement counselling, like I hadn't prior to that, I thought that it was going to be, like the stereotypes really, that you know, the leather kind of chaise lounge kind of thing, come in and lay on, you know, all that type of stuff, like what you see on The Sopranos and stuff. I didn't know, and I'd worked in mental health for a long time at that point, and I still had these stereotypes in my head. I went like that at all. This guy done counselling as a side thing. I was referred to him through work at the time, and the rest of the working week, he worked in the post office in Warrington. He was a union rep, a union steward for them. So we ended up connecting over football and socialism and the union and all this type of stuff. And we spoke for what was about 12 hours, but like over about 10 sessions. And I didn't feel as though I'd spoken about my mum at all. I felt better, I felt really a lot better. And then on the last session, he's produced this poem that he'd written for me. And it was basically using all of the experiences I'd shared about my mum. No, I didn't know I'd shared any, but it was because of the connection we'd made and how comfortable I felt. I obviously had, and he'd made a note of them in his head. And what he'd done was he produced this poem, and it was in 3 parts. And the first part of the poem was based upon things I'd said to him, what I'd shared about my past with my mum. The middle part was, if she was here now, what she'd say. And then the third part was, the first part was what's going on now, and then the third part was if she was here now, what she'd say and how she'd comment, and everything. He captured like quotes that I'd said from over the 10 weeks, and it was incredible what he'd done. It was obviously really emotional, but what that taught me was that something that doesn't seem like it's all bells and all whistles, and you know, you've got all these letters after your name and all these years of experience. You know, it doesn't have to be that to support people when they are at their absolute worst. And I was at my absolute worst. And all this guy did, at least all I thought he did, was talk to me about who's Liverpool playing on Saturday. I mean, it was as simple as that. But obviously, he'd done a lot more, and that's the skill. But it can look a particular way. And holding someone's hand, making them a cup of tea, listening to them, you know, the simple things really have a massive impact. You know, show your support, be open-minded, ask, listen. This don't just talk about mental health is really important. People think that when they're going into support somebody, or when they're having a conversation about mental health, that they always have to talk about mental health. If somebody is going through a bad time, you know, just talk to them about anything that you talk to anyone else about. Mental health might come up in the conversation, but it doesn't have to be the defining topic of the whole conversation. They're living with it all the time. You know, you might be living with it all the time, and somebody might talk all the time about mental health, mental ill health, and it's like constant. You can't get away from it. Be patient, show some trust and respect, but build some trust. Actually, that takes a bit of time. Okay. So the impact of that. Sorry, guys. So just think then, and maybe someone, you can come on camera or you can go in the chat. You know, and just look. You know, so some of the comments from the last section there, you know, I did all I could to understand the mental health diagnosis and how it impacts their life, researching therapy. Laura, you know, you supported a friend, and I think what was the impact then? What did that approach do? Is this suppose something to maybe think about and take away, or if you do feel like commenting, then please do. But you know, what was the impact of your approach?
When I helped somebody, I'll talk because no one else is. When I helped somebody, I just sat and listened and was there when they needed help, and that seemed to help them. That they reached out to a few different people for different kinds of support.
Okay.
And then when they were in a better place, she dropped us all.
Right.
She didn't want us once we'd helped her through her bad patch. And at the time, my father said to me it was because she'd opened up so much, we knew too much about her.
Right.
And when she was in a good place, she didn't want people around her that knew how she felt when she was in a bad place.
Yeah, you know, and sometimes that thanks for sharing. Sometimes that shame and that guilt can carry on for people, particularly if they lose a bit of grip of reality and lose themselves a little bit. But the key thing to take out of that, though, is that you and you know the other group of people were around this person when they needed. the support, and it did have an impact, and it helped that person to move forward and get better. Hopefully, you know, they never went back down that path, but a really good example. Thank you very much. Just see, chat, okay, it's fine. Maybe this is one thing to jot down, or to make a psychological note of and think about later on, really. Again, this is the self-reflection element, really. Oh, okay, perfect. Okay. Some really good comments there. Perfect. Nice. I'm just reading. I want to try and, I'm learning as well. See here, try and get some good. Perfect.
I think I was going to say, I think for me, Matty, I'm thinking of it from, not in a work way actually, I'm thinking of it from personal relationship way with friends and things. I think for me, it's just about what I've found is it's just not maybe always it's not trying to solve the problem for them, is it? It's just because you can't, or give too much advice. I think I've learned that over the years, not to, if your friend comes to you with a problem and they're suffering with the mental health, not to be like, why don't you do this? So just sort of just to take a breath with them, just listen to them and just sort of be there for them, but not try and problem solve, which is what sometimes, you know, it's easy to do, isn't it?
Yeah, and sometimes there's different roles. So people think that when you go into a conversation with somebody, even professionally or personally, I suppose, you don't have to just adopt one stance. You can start off in more of a sympathetic way, and that can change. You know, you can depending on the situation that comes up. And like I think about some of the people we work with who come to us because a lot of them think that we can solve the problems, and sometimes people don't come back. When the first thing I'll say to them is, you know, you're not broken. So I don't think it's about being broken. It's about needing connection and support. And maybe that might come in the form of advocacy rather than anything, you know, kind of therapy, or it might come in the form of mentorship or coaching or reassurance or, you know, signposting. It doesn't always have to come in the or it can just be as a couple of the guys have mentioned before, just listening and being there, just your presence. You know, person-centered counselling is kind of based around that, and that's obviously a massive and long-standing way of helping people, and just listening to people in a supportive way. I say just listening to people, like listening to people is easy, but, you know, listening to people and being there, brilliant. Perfect. Does anybody know if these comments will come up on the recording, just out of interest for other people? No.
I'm not sure. I don't think they will, but I think there's a way.
You can save the chat, and you could probably overlay them if you needed to.
It's obviously not for my benefit, but there's so much stuff that's come out in that chat. That's incredible stuff, you know, to hear colleagues and friends talk about stuff in a way, you know, which is personal to them. But that'll really move, for me, in my experience, that really moves understanding on for people. So if there is a way of capturing that and maybe just sharing that with people, it might be useful. It's just a suggestion. Okay. So we're going to touch on some stuff in a minute. I'm going to get something else up. But, you know, in terms of self-help, for some people, being physically active, you know, journaling, it doesn't always have to be running marathons, you know. It can just be being busy, keeping busy, having a routine, you know, feeling that sense of kind of meaningfulness, really. Identifying mood triggers and stress. Now, we do a whole module around stress within communities, and I always say that the word "I'm stressed" or the phrase "I'm stressed" is something that's thrown around quite a lot. And when you're working with somebody, or even if you're trying to understand it yourself, it's really important to understand exactly what stress means. It's not about saying, oh, you know, that situation makes me stressed. It's too broad. You have to break it down into what that stress means for you. So I tell people to think about, how does it make you feel emotionally? How does it make you think? How does it make you behave or act? And how does it make you feel physically? You know, so sometimes stress can make you feel sick, motivated, whatever. Label it, and label it using them 4 headers: emotionally, mentally, physically, and behaviorally. And then when it comes to you thinking about stress, trying to help yourself or to try and help other people, if you use them 4 labels and try and break it down that way, people can actually stop saying I'm stressed and actually tell you exactly what's going on for them. Mentally, kind of, you know, cognitively, thinking wise, emotionally, feelings, behaviorally, actions, and physically, the sensations that they're experiencing. And once you've labelled it in that way, either for yourself or with other people, supporting them, it becomes a lot more easy to help somebody because you know exactly what's going on. It's not this like catch-all, I'm stressed thing. And you can do that for any of the mental health issues. You can do that for any mental health problem. Break it down into exactly what's going on. So there's other things, you know, things like becoming over caffeinated, drinking too much caffeine. Some people, like me this morning, I didn't get my first cup of coffee till about 11 o'clock. I know that's not good for me. It's not great in the long term drinking too much caffeine, but no, we're having a cup of coffee at 11 o'clock. I'm getting twitchy, you know, but I'm mindful of that. So your diet, eating, sleeping, and acceptance, really being fair to yourself, being, you know, working hard not to invalidate your feelings and what you're experiencing. Okay, has anybody seen a mood diary before? I'm sure people have. Something really quite straightforward and pretty fundamental, basic, you know, low level really. But where mood diaries and thought diaries are really, really useful is in that early stage where you're trying to understand exactly what's happening, exactly what's triggered something for you, exactly what's not just triggered something, but is perpetuating it and is keeping this cycle going. And the fact that you're able to date and time it and put this timestamp on something means that you can really start to think about the circumstances which led up to something, the circumstances how, you know, that were going on at the time, and the circumstances that were happening kind of post the event. And you start to build up this snapshot, and it goes from, you know, you maybe having this understanding of your experience where, you know, I felt angry on Tuesday, right? It could be that basic. If you were to break that down using something like a mood diary, and say, I was feeling angry, but this is what was going on, this is what happened, what could I have done better, what actually did I do okay, and reflect on it. You don't have to do that for every single emotion that you experience because you'll be there all day, but getting into that mindset of doing that for 2 or 3 key emotions, either over the course of the day or over the course of the week, can really help you to try and identify what triggers you and what perpetuates things, and then can lead you to make changes if needs be. See this quite a lot in CBT these days and stuff, but it's a really useful tool, I think, and something that most people can do. There's apps as well that can help you do this quite easily. I can share these slides if people need the slides. So there's some really, really good self-help books and websites out there. There's some really good books out there which aren't really self-help books, but they really help you to help yourself. Does that make sense? Has anyone ever come across A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl? No? So really, you can read it, if you're a keen reader, you can read it in a few days. It's not a particularly long book. But Viktor Frankl was in Auschwitz. And it's a tale of forgiveness, essentially. And it's powerful. It's a really, really powerful text, really. Wasn't written as a self-help book, but it's become really famous as a book that people have used to help themselves. Have people read The Alchemist? Have you come across The Alchemist? The Alchemist is another one that's again not a self-help book, but people have used it quite a lot. Paulo Coelho, I think, wrote that book. Practice assertiveness skills, spend time with supportive people, try and understand how you can be more supportive. Try not to compare yourself to past versions of yourself or how you perceive you should be. And also try not to compare yourself to other people. Social media detoxes, regular detoxes are pretty good for that, where you just completely come off social media, or you just reduce your engagement with social media. If people have never tried that, that's something I'd highly recommend. Okay. Again, just touched on identifying and challenging unhelpful thinking patterns. Try and find meaning in the activities that you're doing. Do more of them. Try and put yourselves in situations where you can do more things that you enjoy doing, and like I say, find meaning and enjoyment in. But also be realistic. You know, nobody's perfect, and you don't have to be perfect all the time either. But I think it's unfair just to say that to people without recognizing the impact that things like social media and things like that can have upon people's ability to always not compare and all this type of stuff. So the way that you come away from that, like I mentioned, is just take yourself away from it, take ownership. Okay. I think, right, okay, so that's not the end of the session itself. I've got a couple of things to show you, but if you do want to follow us on social media, please do. We put a lot of stuff out in terms of things that you can think around and things you can get involved in. If you're local to Liverpool, then you can actually come physically, but even if you're not, we run regular online sessions and things like that as well. Yeah, so please do that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop the share and I'm going to bring up a couple of things. Okay, thank you. Are we okay for time, guys?
Yeah, time's fine. I think your camera may have crashed. Are you still there, Matty? Has it crashed for everybody else or just me?
I think it's just Matt. I think he's coming back now a little bit.
Ah, there we go. Looks like he might have dropped out of the session. I'll see if I can pause the recording.
Yeah.
They record. Thank you. So we got to the end of the presentation, didn't we? Yeah, cool. Thank you. Just a couple of things to show you then. So, right. So, can you see this skills handbook? I can share these as well. Okay, so there's just some of these things you might be aware of, some of these things you might have seen before. But the quite, I call them fundamentals really. These are things that we'd start with for people. You know, self-soothing is one of these things that ties right in with this understanding your own definition and perception of what mental health is and what poor mental health means for you. And self-soothing only works really if you buy into that model, I think, because it can seem quite simplistic to people if they don't appreciate it. But we have obviously our senses and the things, depending on how we are and how much we value what we see, smell, hear, taste and feel. You know, we can gain a lot of satisfaction and enjoyment. Think about any experience that we have in life, it comes from our senses. So again, there's just some suggestions there, but this really will only work if you really think about what it is that you enjoy and what helps you. For me, the sound of silence is amazing, you know, kind of, or just I like water. So when I used to come, I lived away, and when I used to come home, I'd go down to the Mersey and listen to the water, like later on. That really helps for me. But for some people, it can be other things. So really thinking about your senses and how you can engage in things that help you, and doing more of it in times of, it doesn't even have to be in times of distress. It can be something that you practice generally. And the more you practice, the better you get at it. grounding. So self-soothing and the skills that you'll develop within grounding really lend themselves to this. So grounding is exactly what it says on the tin, really. It's something which grounds us, which brings us back down to earth, really. And the first thing is about kind of noticing what's going on, noticing our surrounding. Mindfulness has become really popular in recent years, and the skills that you're developing in mindfulness really interact well with this skill, really lend themselves to this skill, where we just tune ourselves back into the moment, what's going on. But by putting that, like by personalizing that and saying out loud these things and engaging what's going on, you're doing something which is unique and personal to you. It's not just about noticing it, it's about acknowledging it as well. And it's about kind of, I suppose it's a distraction as well from things. You know, if you can notice something that's going on, it might not be something that anybody else can notice, but one thing you can see and something that maybe you can hear, you can smell, you can feel. Repeat in the moment, but repeat also in other points, even when you're feeling okay. And you can practice and you can start to develop these new ways of managing things. But be sure, so this, pardon me, this third point ties right into something called neuro-linguistic programming, sometimes an NLP. It's not particularly well researched approach, really. In fact, the research that's been done on it tends not to be very scientific at all, to be honest with you. But some of the tools and tech, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything bad. But it wouldn't be called evidence-based, I suppose. That's the point I'm trying to make. But the skills and the thinking exercises and the things that it gets you to do really help me. And this third point helps with that, really. It's describing things, but not just describing them, saying I'm sat at the table, I'm sat at the chair. It's really describing what's going on. And you can do this with thoughts. It doesn't have to be physical things. It can be when you're thinking of a memory, when you're thinking of an experience, you can describe it in all its technical glory. You know, what was going on? How did it sound? Was it loud? Was it quiet? Was it big? Was it small? Was it in colour? Was it black and white? You know, and once you get that level of control, your thoughts, then you can start to play around with them and affect your perception of them. Whilst this particular, exercise, it's quite simplistic. What getting in that mindset can help you to do is to say manipulate. Sounds really bad, doesn't it? But manipulate your perception of what it is you're worried about or what it is you've experienced and everything else, and ultimately make yourself feel better. But it starts with this appreciation of what you're noticing with your senses. Okay, and then the skill too that's kind of attached to grounding is this grounding phrase. So sometimes our thoughts can take us away, and like I say, sorry guys, I will share these with Laura and she can circulate them. But sometimes our thoughts can get the better of us and take us on down a path or on a journey that we don't particularly want to go on. But it's important that we kind of acknowledge what's going on, and actually whether things are impacting us there and then. Because if they aren't, and we're actually safe and everything else, it's important that we reassure ourselves of that and just become grounded and centered in the moment. And just an example, really, I am scared and I am aware that I am safe. That's an example. If you didn't do that, you might just be like, I'm scared. You let the thought impact the feeling, the emotion impact the behavior and the action, and it develops into this kind of circular pattern, really. But then if you can develop that grounding phrase, that first one there, it can lead on to others. I've survived the past and I will survive now. I'm okay. I've been through this before. Yes, it was scary, but actually this has happened. And then that can lead on to other things that are more empowering. And again, the more you practice these things, the more it'll become routine. It'll be something that you do quite usefully, quite easily, and becomes quite useful for you. Okay. Again, and the third grounding skill is sometimes it can be something that you have. It can be something that's an object that's comforting. It doesn't have to necessarily be an object. It can be something that you can it can be something you can watch, something you can engage in. But as long as, that's the key word, as long as you completely engage in it and you completely kind of become immersed in it. Like, for example, you know, the first point there, this a special meaning or memory. It's not particularly an object, is it? But it can have real comfort if you can, you know, for me, and I don't want to keep kind of talking about my history really, but for me, it's really easy. My mum's in the back kitchen doing the iron and the drifters are on. You know, she used to have the different Patsy Cline. You know, if you've got a Scouse mum, you'll understand that. But all that type of stuff, see Laura smiling there, it's true, doesn't it? So that's it. For me, it's like my world could be falling apart, but I've practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced, and it'll just bring me right back. And, you know, I've got that good at it now that I could literally be, you know, in the back kitchen. I do need to be careful though, because like I mentioned earlier on, I did actually have a cup of tea with her, so hopefully it doesn't border on the hallucination part, but it tends to help. And like I say, there's physical grounding as well. It seems simplistic, but I'm just going to give you an example of a really difficult situation we had to deal with when I worked down in Cambridge with a lady who had all the labels. She'd been through services since she was a kid. She was only 18 at that point, to be fair, but she'd been through, you know, child and adolescent mental health services. She had engaged in self-harm for a long time. She tried to end her own life several times, and nobody really knew why. And she didn't particularly know why either. There was some learning difficulties as well with her, and she didn't really know why. And it came down to, she used to cut an arm because it wasn't she liked to cut. It wasn't because she even liked the sensation of the cut or that she was trying to hurt herself particularly. It was because she liked the sensation of the blood on an arm and she liked the colour of the blood. Right? It had nothing to do with releasing tension or any of the other things that people say. For this young lady, it was the temperature, the blood on an arm and the colour of the blood. So over the course of about 6 months, we replaced the feeling she got from the colour of the blood with a red Sharpie pen. And I do not exaggerate, a red Sharpie pen. But we built up to that by using vampire blood that we bought off Amazon. But what we done was we put it in a ramekin and we warmed it up. And you know, it's just slightly, and she stopped, you know, reduced the cutting because of that. And we used things like ice cubes to replace the sensation. We used elastic bands on wrists and stuff like that. So things like this can really, really help people. You know, that was an extreme example, but I just wanted to show people that even the most fundamental basic skills can have a use with some of the most complicated situations. Okay. And then the worried street, you might have come across the worried street before. It's something that I find really helps, and it helps people who are quite logical, I think. You know, essentially, can you do anything about it? Well, if you can, what are you going to do about it? And it seems really, if you think about when you're anxious and stressed and worried, you might not be able to do it in the moment if you haven't practiced it, but if you start practicing this now before it gets to that point, and you even make it visual, if you're a visual person, or you might have it up on your phone or whatever, and you begin to practice the skill, then when the time comes for you to be worried, or when you get worried or anxious, you've got this to draw upon. And you know, it's as simple as you know, like I suppose we all recognise this type of chart, don't we? What's going on? Can I do anything about it? Yes, no, and then obviously follow the plan down. It seems, again, really simplistic, and it is really simplistic, and it was designed to be really simplistic, but it tends to work the more you practice it. Okay. And then I'll just stop that one. I'm just going to apologise, guys. I've just got one more up. Right. Sorry, I am here. Again, I'll just go through these. Can you see that? Yeah, second skills handbook. Okay. 3 more skills. Stop, STOPP. Again, when you become overwhelmed, hit pause, take a step back, take a breath. Try and imagine you're like an helicopter really looking down on a situation. Try and take an objective view. If you can, observe, notice what's going on, notice the emotions, try and sit with them. Try and prevent yourself from acting and the urge that you have to act or react. Pull back if you can, look at the situation as a whole, like I mentioned. And then the more you do this and the more you practice it, the more you'll develop tools and techniques and skills and understanding really about what's most helpful in that situation. Obviously, the first time you do this, you might not completely realise, but if you immerse yourself in using it, you can start developing this understanding, which you can then use for this final point, this practice. Try to do what would be most helpful in that situation. Okay, all of these skills require you to believe in them and to practice them, and to really think about all of the stuff we spoke about in the presentation, about your own philosophy of mental health. Safety urge, very closely linked to the last one. It's obviously a metaphor really. It's, you know, surfing the urge is the surfer. The surfboard is helping you to cope. Your coping mechanism, the surfboard, and the wave essentially, and the emotions driving it the wave is essentially the emotions, and you're riding the wave. But in order to get to that point, you need to try and understand exactly what usually helps you to cope in those situations. But the really important part with this is understanding that most emotions can subside, and they'll subside really quickly. Just this chat is perfect. Okay, thanks, Kelly. No problem. I think she's gone.
Has everybody lost him, or is it just me?
No, I've lost him too. Let me pop the recording on pause.
What's happening? The internet actually seems okay there, but right. And final one. So screen problem solving. So very similar to the woolly tree, that kind of might work for quite a logical person, but trying to find what the problem is, try and break it down in the same way that I advised about breaking stress down and mental health problems. Think about what options you have. Like I say, a lot of this is going to take practice and believing in it. Exploring the pros and cons, weigh it up, implement and review. Try and action plan things. You know, try and do a kind of a care plan for yourself type of thing. It really works. It's just having, you know, the best thing to deal with some things is by having a plan in place and kind of prior preparation. And a lot of these things can be done when you're feeling completely fine. In fact, I'd argue that's probably the best time to do them, when you're in that good headspace and you can reflect back upon the things that have impacted upon you, so that you can build this action plan for yourself. Okay, so in terms of content, that's me pretty much done. I don't know if people have got questions. Anyone? No.
I haven't got a question, Matty, but I just want to say, because obviously I know you, and I always find what you say, like you always learn me something different. I always find it really informative and useful. So thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thanks again.
Really, I enjoyed it. Thank you, Matty.
Oh, thank you. Cheers. Well, I mean, any time at all, you know, it's always really positive working alongside McIntyre. I love what you're doing. You know, for such a big company, to be honest with you, to be so kind of keen to make things even better, that's important, because we meet a lot of corporate kind of partners, if you like, and not everybody not everybody wants to do that at the minute, but you guys seem to, which is brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, that's it from me. If there's anything else.
Matty, did you say you was going to share the booklets?
Yes, so I'll share the presentation. I'll share the booklets with Laura, and Laura can do her thing.
Yeah, well,
okay.
We can add them to our intranet, because I think there's some. I'm just thinking of the woolly tray. I really like the woolly tray, actually.
Yeah.
So we can add them on our intranet.
I think a lot of it has clicked with me because I know Nikki probably knows this, but my husband suffered a breakdown about 4 years ago. And a lot of the stuff that you're saying, if he'd have had that back then, he would have probably not have hit crisis point. He would have been able to get through this. And that's even with the help from the GP. He tried tapping solutions. He tried all sorts, and nothing worked. He basically needed to quit his job, quit everything, and press reset on his life. And it worked, but it took a good year for him to get back to normal.
This is it. This is the thing. I think half of the problem is this reliance upon services. So it used to be that services would get involved when services were needed. And usually it was the public and people within neighbourhoods and stuff accessing services when they needed them. Now it seems that no matter what's going on in our neighbourhoods, services are the first port of call. So what's happening is resources are being depleted for political reasons, and the demand for services is going up because of the impact of the political things and the social things. But then the first port of call is the services, which means that there's bottlenecks in their services and wait lists and everything else. And it's all these things coming together. And then what you've got is, because of things like the pandemic, services has taken a step back away from where the problems are, if you like. And these community organisations that are in the middle, really well-meaning, excellent, lovely organisations, but a lot of them were kind of well-meaning people who aren't necessarily experienced, skilled and qualified to do certain things. And the resources that people used to tap into because of funding and different things are being pulled away. So you've got this big thing in the middle. So we're not going to fix things overnight, and we don't want to turn it into a big political dogfight and get on soapboxes and stuff about things. But actually, if we focus upon what's good about what's strong about our communities and the people living within our communities, and try and make what's strong even stronger, and try and let other people access these strengths, then we'll be able to be in a much better position to try and tackle some of the issues. Not all of them. I'm not completely naive with it, but some of them. No. How many of you guys know your neighbours?
I live next door to my best friend, to be fair.
Right. Okay. That's
that was deliberate. So
I've only just got to know my neighbours in the last 3 years, and they're lovely, really nice.
Brilliant. No, it's things like that. It's like, are we doing enough of that? Football groups and things, or whatever. I'm saying football, it can be anything, but sports groups and stuff, it doesn't have to be the domain of a paid service to arrange a sports day. I know it seems silly and it seems simplistic, but it really, really isn't. And the more of that you see, and the more of that we do as a community on our days off and in our spare time, for no payment, for no remuneration in any way, the more of that, the less of these problems we'll see. And at that point, then we've got every right to complain about services if we want. But whilst we're still not doing enough, I'm not saying you guys, and generally not doing enough, then we can do more. Is that okay?
Thank you so much, Matty.
Thank you.
No problem at all. I shall leave you to it. That's okay.
Oh yeah.